Hi there. So we're going to start talking about at this point what is an amphibian, just a general overview of that. And from talking about what is an amphibian, we're going to look at one of our first amphibian groups, salamanders, one of the first amphibian groups to appear on Earth in the fossil record. So when we're talking about what is an amphibian, one of the first things that we keep in mind is that they are ectothermic. Again, that just means cold-blooded, means that they have to move somewhere where it's warm in their environment in order to stay warm. They can't survive in cold temperatures. They are tetrapods. They all have 4 feet, or they have members of their fossil record leading up to them that had 4 feet. We'll see that there's one group that has lost those feet over time. They use their skin for respiration, so they use their skin in order to be able to breathe, for the most part. Usually very slimy. Again, that slime layer, it's kind of similar to when we talked about fish with no scales. That slime layer helps protect their body from toxins and also makes them difficult to grasp. It helps them move through water. And they're also all toxic to some degree. They do have basically areas in their skin where they can secrete certain levels of poison, but again, some predators are affected by them, some aren't. It just depends on the amphibian. Many go through metamorphosis. So again, if we think about metamorphosis in other animals, we think about like butterflies turning from caterpillars. Same thing when we talk about metamorphosis, for example, from like a tadpole to a frog. Metamorphosis is just a change in the body's form. It's more significant than when we talk about from a baby human to an adult human, since baby humans look like adult humans. We're talking about a total transformation where the body isn't really recognizable as being part of the same animal. And they breed in water. We still see a strong connection to water with amphibians, even though they are not fish. We refer to them as indicator species. So again, depending on how the environment is doing, that kind of tells you whether or not you have amphibians in that area. If there are amphibians in an area, it means that the water there is clean. So it's good to have amphibians in a certain spot. They're very sensitive to changes in the weather and changes in water quality. Like we said earlier, because they are cold-blooded, they're found on all continents except Antarctica. Antarctica is too cold for them. And the bottom part there, which may be cut off there a little bit, they are also all chordates and vertebrates. They all have a dorsal nerve cord, and they all have a backbone. So now we'll look at one specific group of amphibians. So we're talking about what is a salamander, now that we know what an amphibian is. So in talking about amphibians, we talk a little bit about where they have come from in terms of evolutionary history. So part of the link between amphibians and fish are lobe-finned fish, especially prehistoric lobe-finned fish like Tiktaalik. This is a reconstruction of Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik is no longer alive today. This is a fossil of that same lobe-finned fish. But again, you can see from those lobed fins, they function almost in a similar way as feet would for amphibians. And we already know that our lobe-finned fish were capable of using their swim bladders like lungs to help them with gathering oxygen. So Tiktaalik most likely had lungs and gills to help it with transitioning through this period. And there was an adaptive reason for that change. So the video that I have on this part, so it's part of a documentary that talks about the transitions between fish to amphibians. The main takeaways, if you do watch that clip that I want you to understand, amphibians, that transition for lobe-finned fishes to amphibians was a desire to get into shallow water where bigger predators couldn't attack them, and also to have basically limbs that help them move leaves and other material around in that shallow water. They could also use those lobes to help basically do little push-ups so that they could get their breathing apparatus above the water so they could breathe air that was above the water and get kind of cleaner oxygen, get a cleaner source of oxygen. So when you think about the evolutionary pressures that led Tiktaalik's offspring to want to live on land instead of in water, part of it was to escape predators. The other big thing was that on the land, there were already insects and arachnids and other types of bugs that we think of. So those were a good food source for those animals. So that's another big draw for amphibians to move on to the land. All right, so talking more specifically about salamanders, the order that they all belong in is called Caudata, or sometimes you'll see it listed as Urodela. The names mean either tail bearers or has tail. We can see that they are amphibians that do have a tail. All of these are salamanders. They mostly live in moist forest floors and caves, so if we see something like our olm, O-L-M, down here, this is a salamander that is specifically adapted for life in caves. But lots of cool places, lots of kind of places with lots of moisture. They all look like lizards for the most part, slender body, 4 legs, and a tail, but do not get them confused. Lizards are reptiles, salamanders are amphibians. Amphibians have really smooth, slimy skin. Lizards have very rough, scaly skin. So the typical life cycle for a salamander, adults will form eggs, and those egg masses are usually just left alone inside of the water. Females will fertilize them internally, usually before they deposit the eggs. Again, there's a video clip later that kind of demonstrates that. So the fertilized eggs eventually will develop into larvae, and in the case of tiger salamanders, sometimes their siblings eat one another. They're cannibalistic. But those that survive will become adult salamanders and start the cycle all over again, from egg to larva to adult. And again, if you want to watch this video clip that's included with the presentation I'll leave on Classroom, this shows someone who had taken some tiger salamander eggs and raised them all the way to adulthood. It's a good time lapse of how they change as they develop. So here, we can see that some salamanders have other steps in their life cycle that are a little different. So this is the eastern newt and its life cycle. So again, we start out with eggs. We get larvae that have those external feathery gills that have to live in the water. Then we get an eft. An eft is a more terrestrial form, lives on the land. And the eft has those strong warning colors in nature, yellow and orange and those kind of bright colors that let predators know, hey, I'm super duper poisonous. If you eat me, you're probably going to get either really sick or die. But then when they become adults, they're aquatic again, and they have these darker colors that help them blend in. We also see some salamanders that never really get past a larval form. So the axolotl is the primary example of this. This is a salamander that's only found in one lake in Mexico in the entire world, so pretty exclusive as far as where it lives. But it just goes from the egg stage to the larval stage, and it keeps all of these features, the gills and everything. So it spends the rest of its life in the water, and it'll just produce more eggs later on. So some of them have shorter life cycles as far as the steps in them. For reproduction, again, mostly internal fertilization. Males produce a spermatophore, so that is the white mass that's attached here to the bottom of this leaf. And then females pick up the spermatophore through their cloaca, again, that opening that is for reproduction and waste excretion, and store it in a specialized pouch, the spermatheca. The eggs are fertilized as they pass through the cloaca, and they're left in clumps or strings inside of the water to develop. So that video shows you the mating process between two salamanders. The male deposits the sperm packet, and the female, who's actually behind him, will pick it up. So if you watch that clip, that'll show you what that looks like. For their diet, we describe salamanders as being opportunistic carnivores. They are not very fast, but when they do stumble onto prey, they will try to eat it. The larger they are, the larger the prey. So here we've got a hellbender who's a bit bigger than the average salamander. They eat larger prey, basically what they can fit in their mouths. For locomotion, we see when we look at a salamander moving from above, it's an S movement. It's kind of similar to how fish move through the water. They barely lift their body up, so they're not particularly fast on land, but they're decent swimmers. This video clip, again, if you look at this on the presentation on Classroom, shows a tiger salamander moving, and you can see they're pretty darn slow, all things being relative. For respiration, depending on what life stage they're in and what their adult stages are like, they can breathe with gills. Again, if they have gills, they've got these external feathery gills in salamanders. They can do it with lungs. So again, if they're terrestrial, if they survive in that, like the F stage, for example, they might use their lungs to breathe in, or they can use their skin. So the hellbender here has lots of wrinkles in their skin so that they can breathe oxygen through the water by absorbing it through their skin. We call that cutaneous respiration. Cutaneous refers to the skin, respiration refers to breathing, so that's breathing through their skin. There are some species of lungless salamanders. These only can breathe through their skins. They literally have no lungs inside of their body. So they live in cold running streams with lots of oxygen present in them. They're going to have a better chance to absorb that oxygen from the water. As far as defense mechanisms, all salamanders are technically poisonous, and again, you can kind of gauge which ones are more poisonous if they have a really bright coloration to it. There are a very limited number of salamander species that are considered venomous, and this kind of gets into some weird parts of the words. But basically, they use part of their body to inject the poison that kind of pierces the poison sacs. And it's such a weird part. It's not what you would think. But if you watch this video clip here, the very last part of the presentation, this is an Iberian ribbed newt. So these little bumps on the sides of its body, that's where its ribs are located. The ribs will poke straight out. They will pierce the poison sac, and it basically works like an envenomous injection. The venom or poison is kind of injected into whatever is trying to eat it and can cause it to enter into the bloodstream. So that's the one exception to the rule. So again, I hope this video helped clear up some stuff about salamanders and amphibians in general, and we will continue talking about some more amphibians.